Hey guys, welcome back. So today we are working on what should be one of the last videos as far as getting this Polaris jet ski all squared away. So I did end up getting a new cylinder off eBay. The cross-hatching on this thing is perfect.
Oh, decent!
It looks like they probably honed it out before they sent it to me or when they pulled it off the machine, but the cylinder looks amazing. When buying these used cylinders, you really got to look at the pictures and read the reviews. And this guy that I got this one from, he had a ton of good reviews, lots of good pictures. I did already get the old cylinder pulled off, obviously, and taking a look at the piston, it's good to see that there's really nothing crazy going on with it. It looks perfectly fine. Granted, we didn't run it much other than out of the water a bit and then quick little trip in the lake, but nothing as far as runtime really to speak of. With all that being said though, we're gonna go ahead and throw some assembly lube in this guy and get it put on there, get everything bolted back up, test out the compression. You can see after a little struggling and persuasion, we've got it in there. Everything slid together smoothly.
This is not true. This is not true at all.
Ended up kind of pinching one of these oil lines down in here underneath the cylinder as we try to put it down, but once you got everything lined up, it really slides in pretty smoothly.
Wrong.
When you do go to put that cylinder on, you definitely want your piston as high up as it'll go, because it'll really give you a lot more slack to be able to work around and make sure those rings are pinched onto those little pins properly and be able to get everything slid on there a lot easier. Now we're gonna go ahead and bolt the cylinder down just so it's not flopping around, and then we're gonna kind of roll this over by hand just to make sure everything's still turning smoothly. Go ahead and take this guard off of the drive shaft back here, and then just kind of grab it. Roll it over, make sure that we're not experiencing any binding. Going super smooth, no weird noises or anything. So we're gonna call that good and go ahead and finish buttoning all this stuff back up. So if you guys remember from the previous video where we initially checked the compression on this thing, we were getting 100 PSI out of this cylinder here in the back that had the questionable cylinder, and then the front two was right at 125. So got everything all screwed in. I had to go and put the battery charger on this. This ski's been sitting for quite a while and did not disconnect the battery like I should have. So ran a little low, but we got a bit of a charge going on it. So we'll go ahead and see what we get. Wow, so you guys can see there, we're right about 125 to 130. So that is great compression. Definitely fixed the problem. That cylinder was no good. So we are back in business, guys. That is great to see. As much as I would like to call this sled good to go until next summer, I do need to address the little trim motor back there because, like I was telling you guys before, this thing does have the electric trim, which does not work. And that's kind of important because it's not a great riding experience when you can't trim these things at all. So we're gonna pull that motor out, see if we can't figure out if it's the motor that's bad or the switch. Get that problem corrected, and then we'll call this one good until next summer. So we got the motor pulled out. I got the connections pulled off of either side here. That's just basically what spins the motor one way or the other, depending on what you're telling your switch to give input for. So just got the battery here on each side. Main thing we want to do is confirm this motor actually works, because if the motor's no good, there's no point in trying anything further. So the motor freely spins both ways perfectly fine. So that eliminates the motor from being a problem. Now we just got to trace the wiring back to the electrical box and all the way up to the handlebars. So on your switch up here, you got a black, an orange, a blue and white, and a green and white. And all four of those wires, they go down through here and into this box. And you can see I went ahead and hooked the battery directly to the orange, which is the power wire, and then the black, which is going to be my ground. And then those two wires with the white stripes, those are the up and down wires. They come back over in here, connect to the motor. So I did take apart this switch. It's not really supposed to come apart, but I did take it apart, kind of put some dielectric grease in there. Nothing in it looked bad or anything. And I didn't test it again with the battery actually hooked directly to the box. I just went ahead and jumped straight to the power and the ground wire. And now you can see the motor is working. So I'm not sure if it's going to work when I hook everything back up. If not, that's kind of weird, and I'm gonna have to think about it and try to figure out what could be going on that would be causing it to not work. But unfortunately, taking this switch apart, I kind of messed up the gasket and whatnot, but I was already kind of planning on maybe having to get a new one. So we'll see if I can get it back together enough and to where I think it's gonna be waterproof, and we may just leave it alone for now. But I want to put everything back together and see if the motor still actuates with the battery actually hooked up to the main electrical box. All right, so the battery is back in and connected directly to the electrical box, how it would be if it was normally running. I left the motor out so that way you guys can kind of see if it rotates at all. The current situation, we can move up and down on this button here. And you guys can see the motor is not turning at all. It's gonna get a little bit loud now, but I'm gonna go ahead and push the start button and then actuate it. And now you guys can see that the motor does turn. I believe that is how it is supposed to work from the factory. I think that the motor is only supposed to be able to work up and down if the jet ski is actually running. So I don't know if it was just me greasing that switch that fixed it or what, but either way, we do now have a working trim motor, which is awesome. So we're gonna go ahead and get everything put back together, try to seal up that switch like I was saying. Hopefully it's not too messed up. See how I can try to hold that back together. I think it was either going to be me damaging it, taking it apart and greasing it, or else we're gonna have to get a new one anyway. So I'm not really super worried about that. And we now know that the motor and everything works. So that's pretty cool. I'm gonna go ahead and get everything put back together. And we'll pretty much call this jet ski a wrap. So now that we do have the jet ski actually running and everything mechanical is completed on it, I'm sure a lot of you guys that have been following this series are curious on just exactly how much I ended up having to put into this thing to get it to this point.
Dollar bills, y'all.
I kept receipts for all the parts I bought, even the little stuff, like just bits and pieces and hardware that I got from Home Depot and local hardware stores. So we'll go ahead and give you guys a full breakdown. So in no particular order, first we had the exhaust. That was $109.99. That ended up being a necessary cost due to the fact that we had a bolt snap off and I had to cut apart the old exhaust in order to get the thing out of the way. Next up, we had a singular head that I did have to buy. If you guys remember the one that was on that back cylinder that was all torn up, the head had kind of taken a little bit of damage and I didn't want to reuse it. That costed $13.99, so nothing too crazy there. Next we had the steering cable. That was also a necessary purchase. The thing was snapped in half, no longer was going to be steering the jet ski. Was able to also pick up and use one of those for $46.99. Next we had the crankshaft. Unfortunately, that was not something that I was originally planning on having to buy. I was hoping for just a top end. If you guys will remember, once we took apart the motor, that crankshaft, the bearings were shot on it. Fortunately, yet again, eBay came in clutch, and I put a crankshaft that I found used, but it was in like new condition, in my cart. And the seller ended up messaging me like a week later and was like, hey, you want to buy this? I want to knock down the price some more. So I ended up getting a pretty good deal on that, I felt like, for $202.49, which was a lot better than like the $500+ that we were looking at buying new, plus shipping. Next, we did have wrist pin bearings. I didn't want to reuse the ones that were coming out of these old pistons, especially being that back cylinder. So I ended up ordering 3 of those. Tried to get some more quality ones. Those ended up being $41.62 for all 3. Next, we had a gasket kit. That was for the full gasket kit for the entire motor. That costed us $68.03. The next item was not one that we absolutely had to have, but I didn't really see much point in rebuilding this thing, putting it back together, and then using the stock fuel pump just to have this happen again. So I ended up buying the Mikini triple outlet fuel pump. That came with the fuel pump and all the hoses, and that was a total of $54.95. Next we had the piston, kind of pricey when you're looking at just one singular piston, but it is what it is. That ended up being $88.43, came with the piston and the rings, that was it. I do have the cost of the hone and the honing fluid. Granted, our whole honing process did not end up working on that cylinder, but since I ended up buying it for the jet ski and it was specifically for it, I feel like I needed to include the cost on it. For the fluid and the hone, that ended up being $58.79. Now obviously I do still have the hone, there's nothing wrong with it, and I do still have the fluid, so that may come in handy in a later project, so not really too worried about the fact that we ended up buying that. And of course, since the hone did not work, we had the additional cost of that used cylinder that we did have to buy. Also got that one off eBay, and as you guys saw, it fixed our compression issue, which was what we wanted. That cylinder did end up costing a total of $80. Aside from that, that was really most of the main components. Then we did have things like fuel line, which I just picked up from O'Reilly's. Can't remember exactly how many feet I purchased, but it ended up being $25.28. Super cheap and well worth it to get rid of all that used rotten fuel line and not have to deal with any gunk that might be in there. I wanted everything, the whole fuel system, whole oil system to be brand new on this thing, so that's where we got it. Pretty cheap to be able to have that peace of mind. I also did make a purchase at Home Depot. Ended up getting a bunch of clear tubing and then also some bolts to replace some missing hardware and hardware that we broke. That ended up being a total of $23.77, so pretty cheap there as well. So with all that put together, that ended up giving us a grand total of
A tremendous amount of money.
$814.33. Which, if you guys will remember, I think I said in the video when I first got this thing, I wanted to keep the budget under $1,000. That was my goal. If I could get this thing running for under $1,000, I'd be super happy, which we achieved. There definitely are still some tweaks and stuff that we got to work out. Fortunately, that trim motor didn't end up being bad, so that saved us some cost there. With being about $200 under budget, that gives me plenty of money to work with. I can easily buy a set of traction mats for about $80. That'll replace all these just destroyed ones that are on this thing. And should also give me enough money to buy a seat cover. Those usually run right around $100. All in all, would I say it's worth it? I think so. I think it was a very good learning experience. Just getting to rebuild that whole motor, see how these Polarises work, see what flaws they came with from the factory and how to correct them. Granted, we don't know if this build is going to hold up long term, but for now I'm feeling pretty happy with it and definitely glad I did it and would do it again. The main thing, if you guys are watching these videos and it's something that you're interested in, which is probably why you're watching it, I would say just get into it, man.
Just do it!
It's a really fun hobby working on these things and getting to make something out of nothing, which is basically what this was. I mean, it was a blown up pile of junk with absolutely no right future at all. I mean, the guy was getting rid of it. It was either I was taking it or it was going to the dump. So it's pretty satisfying when you get to take something like that and actually bring it back to life, make it a running machine again, something that we'll be able to have fun with on the lake next year.